You can't go here and you can't go there. You can't use this and you can't use that because it's not yours. This was segregation. In the beginning, we're going to talk about the separation and how it all started after slavery in the 1870s. Then we're going to talk about during, which was the sit-ins and the protests, which took a really long time until the abolishment in 1964. Like I said before, the definition of segregation is the separation or isolation of a race, class, or ethnic group in a restricted area. The restricted area all started with just transportation and schools. Then it evolved into everywhere. Restaurants, cemeteries, water fountains, anything. Pools, everything was segregated because of Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws was the real start of segregation. Segregation may have started after slavery in the 1870s, but it all started when everything became segregated. Separate but equal, right? Not right. The definition came from Merriam-Webster Dictionary and then Jim Crow laws from the Biblioteca Encyclopedia. Then during. During was the sit-ins, which all started with 4 African-American college students. They went into a Woolworth store and asked for coffee, and they refused them service. So they sat and waited patiently until finally the cops came in. It all started as and added to the list of peaceful protests that was all of slavery. Then you have the bus boycott, which Rosa Parks, who doesn't know about that, right? But it wasn't just Rosa Parks. There's bus boycotts all over. It may have started with her. And for those of you that don't know, it was Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat to a white man on the bus because the blacks had to sit in the back and the white, if they wanted your seat, you had to stand. Separate but equal, right? Sit-ins was from ushistory.org and bus boycott was from Christian Science Monitor. And then the end of slavery, the abolishment. The abolishment started with Brown versus Board in 1954. In 1954, Brown versus Board occurred and segregation in schools and transportation was abolished. And then 10 years later in 1964, it was all abolished. Everything. You could go into any store, any pool, anything. You could use any water fountain you wanted because it was all one. Separate but equal, right? Separate but equal is everything. Everybody said separate was equal, but separate wasn't equal. Equal was everybody using everything because there wasn't specific things you could and couldn't use. We started with the definition, which was the separation or isolation of race, class, or ethnic groups in a restricted area, which then became everywhere with Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws started in the 1870s after slavery, where everything was segregated, not just schools and transportation. Then the protests, the sit-ins, and the bus boycotts, and the peaceful protests, just marching streets for hours. The sit-ins were all of the children and college students, high school students, everybody. People started to sit in to all white or all black restaurants and ask for something and wait to be refused service. The bus boycott, Rosa Parks, and all of the bus boycotts were people, African Americans, wouldn't give up their seats to white men because they weren't higher power. Everybody was equal, but nobody understood that until the abolishment. Started with Brown versus Board in the in the 1954, where Brown versus Board abolished transportation in school segregation. And then the full segregation of happened in the 1964, where after the civil rights movement passed, nothing was segregated. And as for the conclusion of segregation, there was no more colored only. There was no more white only. Everybody was equal, finally. But even today, we're not really equal. People still have set in their heads that blacks and whites are different, but really we're just the same. We just came from a different background, a different country. But now we're all here and we're all one. We are United States citizens. That's all that matters. Thank you.